Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me. And today it's Wednesday, which means it's Killer Wednesday, where we discuss the psychological explanations for why these killers committed the crimes they did. Now, I am going to preface this by saying this is not to justify anyone's actions. It is simply looking at a possible explanation for why these killers committed the crimes they did. I also want to say that anyone with these psychological or mental health disorders, that's not everyone with these disorders will go on to commit these types of crimes. It is just a possible explanation into why these killers did what they did. So today we're going to be looking at, I think he was known as something butcher. I'm not entirely sure. His name was Robert Hanssen, and he was known to be a serial rapist and a serial killer. There is a movie that was based off of him and his crimes. I believe it's called The Frozen Ground, and it stars John Cusack, Nicolas Cage, and Vanessa Hudgens, who plays Cindy Paulson, who was, I think, one of the only survivors of Hanssen's, and that's how I think he was able to be caught. So if you go and watch the movie, it is a really great movie, and it details a lot of what he actually did. So let's get started. So Robert Hanssen was born in Esterville, Iowa in 1939. His parents were Christian, who was a Danish immigrant, and Edna Hanssen. It was said that he had quite a difficult relationship with his dad. I believe his dad was very strict and very into teaching his son about hard labor and making money, maybe so he could support himself. So his father would often make Hanssen work long hours in the family bakery. He was often bullied during his childhood for his stutter, and I think his stutter went into adulthood and his severe acne. It was said that he didn't have any close friends in school. After graduating in 1957, he enlisted in the US Army and became a very skilled marksman. I believe he did this one weekend out of the month, and then every other day that he wasn't doing the job for the army, he would work in the family bakery. He also volunteered as an assistant drill sergeant at the police academy in town of Pocahontas. I'm not sure where that is, maybe somewhere in Alaska, because I believe that's where he committed those crimes. In 1960, it was said that he fell in love and married a local woman. It didn't say her name. They married on December 7th of that same year. However, that same year, he burned down a school bus garage of the local high school. He kind of did have a history of petty crimes like this. He was then caught when a friend turned him in, and he got a 3-year sentence, and during which time he got divorced. After serving just 20 months, I guess he got out because of good behaviour. He was then diagnosed with an infantile personality disorder. So infantile personality disorder is characterised by a person having very immature feelings and reactions, and a lack of willpower and confidence, just like a child would react to things. Someone with this disorder is said to have a lack of control, and they haven't kind of mastered those social skills that they need to have in everyday life. In 1963, he remarried his wife, and he also actually had 2 children with her. In 1967, after multiple sentences for petty crimes, him and his family then moved to Anchorage. At this time, he was actually known to be very well liked by his community, and he became an avid hunter during this time, breaking a lot of records within this hobby that he did. His weapons of choice were rifles and a bow and arrow. However, his crimes didn't stop, and a year later he was convicted of raping a prostitute and also attempting to rape a housewife, and he only served 6 months. I'm not sure why they gave him such a short sentence, because again, this wasn't his first arrest. This had been like several arrests, so he really should have been kept in longer than 6 months. However, that just wasn't the case. In 1977, he was arrested again for another petty crime, stealing a chainsaw. And it was at this point that he was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So this disorder is known to affect your moods, and it is very erratic change in moods. Mostly going from one extreme to the other. And it was previously known as manic depression. He was prescribed lithium, but he wasn't required to take it by law, so I don't actually think he took his medication. And again, after 1 year in prison, he was again released. In the early 1980s, he reported a burglary in his home. It was actually found later to be staged. However, at this point, he did get an insurance payout. And with this, he opened a bakery and established himself as a very well-liked family man within the community. In January 1982, he bought himself a bush plane, and he had actually been denied his license, so he didn't actually have a license to drive this plane because of the medication that he was meant to be on. So moving on to the murders and the victims. Sorry guys, I am a bit blocked up today. He claimed that after his initial release in 1973, at that point he became a serial rapist. He would pick up prostitutes from the Anchorage district and take them on his plane to the wilderness where I think his house was. I'm not entirely sure. At this point, he would then rape and torture his victims, and the ones who complied and just let him get on with it, he would release, and the ones who, would struggle, he then killed. There were at least 17 women who were picked up between 1980 and 1983, who were killed for not complying to being raped and being tortured. The victims, there was an unidentified victim, and she was known as Aklutna Annie. She was found on July 1980, and it was a worker who had discovered a shallow grave. Joanna Messina, who was 24, was found July 1980. She was a topless body dancer, and she was found again decomposed in a pit, so you couldn't actually necessarily say what she died of because she was that badly decomposed. But his victims were always killed in very much the same way. Sherry Morrow, 23, was found September 1982. She was shot in the back 3 times. Paula Golding, who was 17, was found September 1983. She was actually found 3 months after she had been kidnapped. 3 months after the kidnap and rape of Cindy Paulson, who actually escaped and helped police catch the serial killer. Paula was murdered in the same way as Morrow. All his victims were murdered in the same way. They were always found to be shot in the back. There were multiple unknown victims, but they managed to identify a lot of them. Sue Luna was found April 1984. She was made to strip and run like an animal while Robert hunted her, and this was what he would do with every single one of his victims. He would rape them, he would torture them, then he would set them free, but then he would go hunting for them, and eventually he found them and killed them. Dylan Frey, April 1984. Teresa Watson, April 1984. Angela Freckdorn, 1984. Tamara Pedesa was found April 1984. Lisa Futrell was found May 1984. Andrea Artillery, Hanssen. So this was when it was found that Hanssen was then known to be a trophy collector, because her fish necklace, which was made custom made for her was missing, and it was found in his possession. So as I said, after raping and torturing these women, he would set them loose in the woods, making them think that they were getting to escape, and he would hunt them down and kill them. And it was, like I said, he was known to be an avid hunter, so it was like he enjoyed the hunting of it. Not just the kill, but the actual hunt, that he was the predator and they were his prey. His crimes first became known in 1982 when a body of an exotic dancer, Sherry Morrow, was found near Nick River by 2 off-duty police officers. It took 2 weeks to identify her body, and she was found with a .223 shell casing, which was found near her body, and that's how they knew what kind of rifle was used. 2 years previous, 2 other women were found in similar circumstances, one which was a Jane Doe and the other which was Joanne Messina. June 13th, 1983, prostitute Cindy Paulson was spotted just by someone with a handcuff on her wrist. I think it was a trucker that had spotted her. The trucker then gave her a ride to a local motel where she then waited for her pimp, and at this time she also called the police, and an officer named Greg Baker arrived to take her statement. Paulson was told them how a man had offered her $200 for oral sex, but that he then handcuffed her and forced her at gunpoint into his car. He then drove her to his family home and brutally raped and tortured her within his home. I believe his family was away on a trip. He then drove her to his airport, putting her in his plane, presumably to kind of hunt her down and kill her like he had done with the other girls. However, while he was loading supplies onto the plane, she managed to escape. She did make a formal statement to police. She identified the make, colour and the tail number of the plane, where it was then found out that Hanssen was the owner of the plane, and he was actually also identified in a lineup by Paulson. However, 2 of Hanssen's friends provided an alibi for the night that Cindy was kidnapped and raped, so at this point they couldn't really do anything. September 2nd of the same year, a body of another victim was found. This was Paula Golding, and the case into Robert Hanssen was then reopened. Alaska investigators looked into Hanssen again and contacted the FBI, who sent in profiler John Douglas. He profiled the killer as someone who had low self-esteem, a history of rejection, and who was an experienced hunter, all of which he was correct about. He was also correctly predicted that the killer took souvenirs and had a stutter. I don't know how he knew the killer had a stutter. Yeah, it never said how he came to that conclusion, but that's what the conclusion he came to. It was at this point that Hanssen's friends then confessed that the night that Cindy Paulson was kidnapped and raped, they then confessed that their alibi was false. Hanssen was then brought in for questioning, and at this time the officers were also gaining warrants to search his home and his plane. They found a collection of weapons, including the .223 rifle, and found many trophies from different victims, and these kind of included the victims' IDs and their jewellery. It was also found that on an aviation map he had marked certain locations, and it's presumed that these were the locations of bodies of victims. When the FBI forensic lab matched the shell casings found near victims to Hanssen and his weapons, Hanssen then entered a plea bargain. He was charged with 4 murders of the victims that had already been found and the abduction and rape of Cindy Paulson, and he agreed to confess to all of this. He gave the police details about all of his victims and showed the burial sites on this aviation map in exchange for a life sentence instead of the death penalty, I guess. He showed police 17 at different burial sites, but refused to help with the other 4 murders that he had been accused of. It was theorised that he wouldn't confess to killing these certain women because they weren't prostitutes, they weren't exotic dancers, and so he couldn't justify to himself why he had killed those people. I'm not sure how you could justify killing a prostitute either, but he must have very high morals. February 18th, 1984, Hanssen was convicted of murder and sentenced to 461 consecutive years in prison. So moving on to the psychiatric evaluation, I have already said what he was already diagnosed with, but these are further diagnoses. So criminal profiling showed Hanssen to be a narcissistic psychopath. He displayed symptoms of both, and he was known to be a narcissist and very, very antisocial. He showed signs of self-importance, arrogance, and some sort of need for validation, and this can kind of be seen when he was very much loved by the community. He also showed signs of aggression, impulsive actions, and he did deviate from societal norms. Someone with this disorder is known to be very dangerous and very psychologically disturbed, which we can see within Hanssen. May 2014, Hanssen was moved to Anchorage Correctional Facility due to undisclosed health conditions, and August 21st of that same year, he died due to undisclosed health issues. And that is the story of, I think he was known as like the Butcher Baker. Yeah, so it was seen very early on, especially with his petty crimes, that he had some sort of psychological and mental health issues. I think he maybe killed the prostitutes and the exotic dancers because he maybe felt to him that that was disgusting and they deserved to be raped and then hunted down like animals. That's possibly what he thought. I don't think that. That is just my theory of how he thought of these people. Because, like I said, with the other murders, I don't think they were in that type of profession. So he then couldn't say, like, oh, you know, they're disgusting. They do this for a living, etc. Luckily, he was caught. And if this is the sort of content that you like, I am here every Wednesday doing Killer Wednesday. And I am here on Saturdays as well for Saturday's Haunting Hour. If you have any cases you want me to look at, definitely leave it in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe